All right, so just to expand on what I was talking about, like I said, my whole life I was a communist, kind of leftist, anti-white, and I'll kind of describe again the way I was before 2013 when I was in college. But like one of the things, and also when I was on Kauai, but one of the things that I felt like that I believed was like I tried to make the Jews into the good guys and the white people into the bad guys, right? I tried to subvert everything because white people would a lot of times blame the Jews, be like, oh well, the Jews, they deserved all the poor treatment, and they've been kicked out of 169 countries. It must be their fault. I thought it was victim blaming, so I tried to make the Jews into the good guys. So like again, I wanted to believe that the Bible was communist, and like one of the examples that I had, and I was against my grandpa, and this was like I learned from a Korean cult group that when Jesus multiplied bread, that was just him having everybody share. And I was like, see, Jesus was a communist. And I wanted, because I knew that people who were against communists tended to be against Jews and against black people. I thought they were white supremacists. And so I was for communism. And I wanted to say, see, Jesus was actually a communist. Another example of that was, but then like my grandpa was like, no, he thought that Jesus, he could actually manipulate the energy. But again, I was like, well, yeah, because the spiritual people and the religious people, they tend to be white supremacists. They tend to be against welfare and communism. And I was like, there's white supremacists. And well, just like the other example was, Jesus at one point, he, or when the apostles, at first they're only bringing Jews to be followers of Jesus, right? Or Samaritans who I thought were Jewish, right? So I was like, oh, see, the Bible's just genetic Darwinism. I want to say the Bible's just genetic Darwinism and kind of destroy Christianity, because I thought Christianity maintained division between Muslims and Christians and black people and brown people, and I wanted black people and brown people to mix. So I was like, yeah, it's just Darwinism. But then also like there's this one part where the Gentiles are with the Jews, and they just started converting the Gentiles, and this was Paul. But Paul, he was the only one who converted the Gentiles. But according to the Messianic Jews, Paul was only converting Gentiles who we thought were the lost tribes of Israel, right? So again, I was like, I thought that could be genetic Darwinism and evidence of genetic Darwinism. But when they converted the Gentiles, they had the Gentiles doing the labor, like doing the cooking and the labor stuff. And I was like, see, the Jews, this was just a trick to convert the Gentiles in order to defeat them, convert them to a pro-Jewish religion, and it destroyed Rome. Like kind of what Gibbons argued. So, and I thought that, the Bible even kind of explicitly said that, they convert the Ninevites and it destroys Nineveh. They convert and I saw the New Testament as an allegory of the destruction of the Roman Empire. And I already illustrated that. So I was like, see, it was just a trick. So I wanted to destroy Christianity and make the white people think that it was only for the Jews. And like it says in the Bible, like, Jesus says like salvation is from the Jews. And it says in the Bible, like, the God will abandon the Jews, but then he will save them in the end. And even Paul's like, yes, all the Jews will be saved in the end, but you Gentiles can be grafted out. And I was like, see, it was just all a trick. The Romans kicked the Jews out of Israel, but then the Christianity was to bring the Jews back to Israel. And it was just a trick to bring them back to Israel to save them. And really, it was just a trick to trick the Gentiles to save them. So I wanted to destroy Christianity and argue that. Now, like I said, at this time in 2020, when I became a leftist communist again, like 2021, 2020, I kind of wanted to believe the same thing. But, at that time, like I just stopped being a right-winger nationalist, but then I became a left-winger communist anti-white again. And then, but as I said, my grandpa started teaching me again. And then my grandpa's teaching me, and I'm starting to learn a little bit from him. So I'm trying to get a better idea. What is the flow? And so, but my grandpa was saying, I asked my grandpa, like, I told him I was a white supremacist for a while. And my grandpa was like, well, yeah, white supremacy is dualistic software. And I understand that now. But he didn't really explain to me what the flow was. So I thought, okay, well, and he was like, you weren't in the flow. That was dualistic software. But I was like, but he didn't teach me what the flow was. So I was like, okay, okay, the flow must be being for race mixing. But I was confused because my grandpa's against welfare. So I was just thinking like, well, grandpa, you just don't get it. I read a book and it says that welfare is actually good for the people who you give it to. And it doesn't enable them. And they don't buy drugs and stuff with it. It helps them to buy food and stuff. So I was just like, And I was like, well, if you're against white supremacy, then, then the flow must be for race mixing. So I was like, okay, well, I'll be for race mixing again. So I became anti-white again, and I was for race mixing. Now I understand that the flow is seeing things as it is, and not having dualistic software, not expressing dualistic software, and not, so not being for race mixing or against race mixing necessarily. But my grandpa would say in the flow, you're inspired, and you transcend the ego, you transcend your impulses and stuff. So, and it's not you doing it when you're in the flow. It's not you doing it. It's like a higher harmony doing it, right? I understand that now, but at the time, my grandpa didn't teach me that. I was confused. It took a long time for my grandpa to start to teach me that stuff again. So, and to teach me that, and for my grandpa to teach me enough that where I could start to get an inkling of that. So, but at this time, I became a leftist, and also at that time, I started to get the swag flow again. And I'm not going to describe what that is, but I was watching a dude at a party that I went to. It was a Nam yoga party. And he had the swag flow. And I started to duplicate it, and I got it, but I would lose it again. But I started to kind of have it again, but it was artificial swag flow, but I kind of had it. And girls were starting to like me, so I was going to these parties. And I was going to parties with a lot of Jewish people, and a lot of the Jewish people in like these hippie things, right? And like one of the Jewish guys, he was with this black girl, and there was and she was in the movie like Django, and they were doing like interracial porn and stuff. And again, it was like that hippie Jewish stuff, like anti-religion, but also spiritual, but like for race mixing and stuff. And I was hanging around that group. And again, I became a leftist communist again. So I became more, I guess you could say satanic again, like anti-Christianity, anti-religion. But my grandpa started teaching me again, and my grandpa, so I'm trying to understand what my grandpa's teaching me. So my grandpa's teaching me like, yes, IQ doesn't matter, just go hard, just go all out. And he's like, oh yes, genes don't matter. But I tried to explain to my grandpa, I was like, Grandpa, the reason why you believe the metapsychiatry stuff is because it's good for the white race. Your whole like take responsibility for everything and work hard and don't take welfare. And like, everything is energy, kind of the spirituality. I was like, that mentality, that is good for the white race, and that's why you believe it. But my grandpa's like, what? He tried to be all progressive, like, what? You saying that I just believe that because I'm a white guy? Because I'm a white guy? And I'm like, no, Grandpa, you don't get it. I'm not saying it's like necessarily genetic, but I'm saying it's good for the white race to believe that because white people have power. And like the German Protestant work ethic, like working hard is good for white people. It might be an aspect, there might be a genetic aspect of it too. But I was like, the reason why you're inclined toward this belief system, this spiritual psychology, transpersonal psychology, metapsychiatry belief system is because it's good for white people. But my grandpa's like, what? But my grandpa, he tried to be all progressive and tried to be all like on the high horse. And he's like, I don't believe anything is like, because people are anyway because they're white or because they're black. I think it's, I don't believe that genes determine things. I just say, if you're in the flow, you just take responsibility, you just go all out, and you don't make excuses. You don't make excuses. But again, I was like, well, that's a white supremacy outlook. Like, tell black people, stop making excuses. Oh, so what? You had slavery. Stop making excuses. Forget about the past. Just be in the, just be in the flow. Be in the moment. You probably were enslaved because you weren't in the flow. That's why my grandpa said the reason why the Israelites were enslaved, they weren't in the flow. And there's truth to it. I'm not saying it's bad. But I was like, I'm not saying he's completely wrong, but I was saying, you're more inclined to that ideology because it's good for white people. It's good for the group in power. I found medicine. So like Dr. Hora, he basically taught like you create your reality with your thoughts. Now my grandpa toned it down and he's like, we don't necessarily create the reality, but it's best to take responsibility for everything because, that's all you can do. You can't, you can't take, you can't, if it's genes, then you can't do anything about genes, but you can take responsibility for your software. But in my mind, I'm like, well, dude, let's be real. So, there's a lot of stuff that's genetic, and there might be differences between black people and white people. And just be like, oh, there's no differences. Just go all out. It doesn't matter. Just take responsibility. I'm like, that could be, wishful thinking and not accurate. And same thing with men and women and stuff like that. And like, I remember later I had an idea that like left-handed people tend to be more sinister, and that was an idea back in the day. And I was like, it could be a genetic thing. It could be because they're more right-brained, and they tend to be more like, like white guys tend to be act more black or be with black girls, and who are left-handed. I thought that left-handed was related to like being sinister. But my grandpa's like, no, I don't like to make any generalizations like that. I just say, just be in the flow. It doesn't matter. Like, don't make excuses. If you say like left-handed people are that way, then you just make excuses and, you just resign to that. No, just be in the flow. Upgrade your software. Everybody can upgrade their software. But in my opinion, I was like, I don't know if that's necessarily true. A lot of people say that there's evidence that people can't upgrade their software, that people are born a certain way. Like psychopaths are born that way. And yes, there is environmental aspects too. There's a lot of variables. There's environment, there's genes, but to just be like, oh, well, just go all out and I was like, that's just a white supremacy, work hard, Protestant work ethic, and that's good for white people to believe because working hard and maintaining the system is good for them. And so I wanted to explain to my grandpa this, but my grandpa tried to make me out to be a racist, like, oh, you think it's just because I'm a white guy I believe that stuff? Oh, it's just because I'm a white guy? That's not what I'm trying to say. But he tried to take the high horse and make himself all holy, like, oh, no, that's not the reason. I don't believe. And there was another like book that I read. It was saying how like black people and white people in America, it was called like the Four Gods of America. And one was like black people tend to believe in God in a certain way, and white people tend to believe in God in a certain way, and women tend to believe in God in a certain way, and educated people tend to believe in God in a certain way. And I was like, and again, it's like what they believe in God in a way that's what's best for their group, right? In general. But my grandpa would be like, well, I don't want to make generalizations, and I don't say it's. You say it's because they're black that they believe that? You think it's because they're black? And he tried to look down upon me, like, you think it's because they're black or because they're white that they believe that? Like, he's trying to make me be like, because he's an existentialist, and he like his whole thing is like take responsibility for everything and don't blame genes, don't blame anything else but you take responsibility, upgrade your software, don't blame genes. But I'm like, I'm not saying it's because they're black because of their genes necessarily. It's because of a variety of factors, because of the culture, because of environment, and because they fit within that culture. And so they tend, if you are black, designated black, then you tend to believe these certain things in a different way than people who are designated white. And I'm like, this makes sense to me. But grandpa, he wouldn't take you. No, I just say it's software and just upgrade your software. And I understand what my grandpa's trying to say. He's trying to be like, well, yeah, some black people have express superior, inferior software. Some express, top dog, underdog software. Some express mutual participation software. And, but so I understand what he's trying to say, and trying to, some black people are in the flow, some white people are in the flow, and mutual participation and oneness and transcending the rational consciousness. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. But so this is kind of where I was getting at. So my grandpa started teaching me again. And another thing, so I started making podcasts with my grandpa. My grandpa was telling me his ideas, and one of his ideas is like, there's different levels of consciousness. And he kind of gets it from Ken Wilber. But like, he's like, the first level is instinctual consciousness. And then there's magical consciousness, where people believe in like gods, and they believe in, they personified gods that control reality. And that's magical thinking. My grandpa said that's magical thinking. Then they move into ritualistic consciousness, where people start to follow rituals, and it aligns them with the flow. It aligns them with what works and to the order they depend on. And, and that helps them to get closer to the flow. But then he says, well, then people move into rational consciousness, where they start to, use science, and they start to see what works, and they start to use thinking and logic, and that's a higher level. And then finally, there's the transpersonal, transrational level, which is what he's at, where you're like, you move beyond the rational, and you start to, I guess, where Jesus is at, where you see everything is energy and everything is one, and you can manipulate the energy. And I think that's what my grandpa believed. But then I started poking holes in his argument. So I'm like, okay, so grandpa, you believe, but he doesn't believe anything, because he's like, if you believe anything, you're not in the flow, because then you're attached to your belief and you're not open to inspiration. But I'm like, okay, so grandpa, do you think that somebody can make it rain? And my grandpa's like, I doubt it. That's kind of magical thinking. I doubt it. But I'm like, well, what about Jesus? You said that he can manipulate energy. He can turn water to wine because he can manipulate the energy. He recognizes everything is energy, so he can do that. And then my grandpa's like, well, Jesus could do it because he had super high level of awareness, but, I don't think that people can do that. But I'm like, well, can't someone else have super high level of awareness like Jesus? Like, can't someone else be in the flow like Jesus? He's like, I guess, I don't know. But I'm like, dude, there's so many holes in your theories. And like I said, my grandpa's, His thing was all new age, but very rational. Like he tried to make the new age rational. I don't know why. I think maybe a part of it was he thought that maybe I was crazy and he was trying to ground me or something. I don't know, but there's too many holes in his stuff. But it's energy. But the way I saw it is, I kind of saw it like Jung. I saw the world as archetypal, and as like a reflection of the world of forms, and the quadrant as being the ultimate form. And if you look in reality, you see the quadrant manifested everywhere, because that's the ultimate form, the form of the good that Plato talked about. That was my thesis. But my grandpa's like, I don't understand Plato. I don't understand that stuff. And I read to my grandpa the book, the Kybalion. And in that book, they're talking about like basically Platonic ideas, like that as above, so below. This world is a projection. And I started reading Dr. Hora's book, and I started seeing that's what Dr. Hora kind of taught. But my grandpa's like, oh, I don't understand that. So my grandpa didn't teach what Dr. Hora taught. And Dr. Hora saw everything as cosmic love intelligence, and as like consciousness is more mental. And I saw like, I thought of God as more mental, and as like a consciousness or like, as something, but my grandpa's like, well, he didn't believe that. My grandpa thought everything is energy, and he didn't want to believe in like a consciousness. And so my grandpa didn't believe in gematria. He didn't believe in synchronicities. He thought that was magical thinking. But I saw reality as more like a dream, and I thought that there was synchronicities, and there is gematria, and there is this quadrant pattern supernaturally being manifested, because it's like a dream, and there's some sort of intelligence behind it. But my grandpa didn't want to believe that. My grandpa's, I think he saw the idea of an intelligence behind it as a personalism, and the belief that there's a separate God, but there is no separate thing, or everything is just energy. That's what my grandpa wanted to believe. So he was making things very rational, and I didn't think he understood reality. And I think that reality is built around the quadrant model. The quadrant model is the basis of reality. So, but my grandpa didn't understand that. So again, it just led to problems. So my grandpa, I don't think he understands reality. And then he's looking down on me for not understanding that everything is energy. But I'm like, that's not even what Dr. Hora taught. My grandpa's like, you'll never understand it. You'll never understand that everything's energy. But I know what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, you'll never, get in the flow and transcend the ego and be in oneness consciousness. You're too stuck in self-confirmatory ideation, and you trying to make things happen. But I'm like, dude, you don't understand reality. My grandpa didn't understand reality. His theses of reality, what he was saying was not accurate. He was accurate in some, like he had some good ideas that helped me. And I think that it helped me a lot, but at the same time, he didn't understand reality. Reality, it was more in line with what Dr. Hora was saying. But even like Dr. Hora, who my grandpa learned under, he said that, yes, you do create the clouds and the rainstorm, because as in he said, like from the Gospel of Thomas, as within, so without. So he was like, yes, if there is a storm, you created that storm. You're creating your reality. But my grandpa didn't, my grandpa tried to make things more rational. So he used the new age, like you create your reality, you're responsible for everything. But he kind of toned it down, like, well, you don't really create it, but you choose whether you experience it or not. So I can be in the storm, but I don't have to experience the storm, So my grandpa kind of basically took Dr. Hora's teachings, but then toned it down in a very rational way. And it just like, so but at the time I didn't understand, I didn't know that, because I hadn't really studied Dr. Hora that much. But my point is, though, like, again, he was full of hypocrisy and full of contradictions. Like, okay, Jesus could manipulate the clouds, but not this other dude. He can't manipulate the clouds, but I'm just confused. So I'm trying to get a grasp of what my grandpa's teaching. But again, my grandpa, then he would teach later, like, it doesn't matter what you believe, because your beliefs are shaped by your ego, which is true, I think. It appears, right? Your beliefs are shaped by your ego. And that's what I started to realize later, But my point is, at this point, I was confused, but I became a leftist communist again. And when my grandpa's talking about, he's like, yes, when you were a white supremacist, you were expressing dualistic software and you weren't in the flow. So I'm thinking, okay, so the flow is like being for race mixing and stuff. So I'm thinking, okay, my grandpa's for race mixing. I didn't know. He didn't explain things well. So I was confused. And I became a leftist communist again. But I was just confused because I was like, well, Grandpa, why aren't you for welfare and stuff? Why do you believe, why? But my grandpa's like, well, because you resent, when people give, then they resent the people they give to, and the people who get, they resent. But I'm like, but the evidence shows that it's helpful. But again, I wanted race mixing and stuff, and I thought my grandpa's for dualistic software. I mean, for transcending dualistic software. I'm thinking like, well, so how come he's not? That's race mixing. I thought that was race mixing, like transcending. My grandpa would teach like, don't try to protect and promote and preserve the self. So I'm like, okay, so race mixing is good then. But now I realize that was actually me trying to protect and promote and preserve myself, because I saw myself as Jewish, and I wanted race mixing to defeat the white people. So like I still wasn't in the flow. So I'll get more into this in later lectures.